My heat ended a month ago, but something felt wrong with my body. Every morning started with dizziness, nausea creeping up whenever I caught certain scents, and this bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. I kept lying to myself that it was just work stress, maybe coming down with something seasonal. But deep in my chest, in that quiet place where instinct lives, I already knew the truth. This was because of Roy. Roy bonded with me 6 months ago. He told me I was his destiny, his everything, and we chose each other when the entire world stood against us. His scent, cedar mixed with rain, used to feel like coming home, like finding shelter in a storm. But now, staring out my apartment window at the gray morning sky, I wondered if I'd been living in a beautiful delusion this whole time. I scheduled an appointment at the Omega Clinic, my heart pounding the entire train ride there. The waiting room smelled sterile and cold, nothing like the warmth I desperately needed. When the doctor finally called me back, confirmed what I already suspected, my entire world shifted on its axis. "You're pregnant, Jaxon. About 5 weeks along," she said, glancing up from her clipboard with a gentle professional smile. "Congratulations." Congratulations. The word echoed in my head like a foreign language. My hand moved automatically to my stomach, pressing against the flat surface as if I could feel the life growing inside. Roy's child. Our child, the living proof of our bond. The physical manifestation of everything we promised each other. I pulled out my phone the second I stepped outside the clinic, fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped it twice. "Roy, I need to see you. Right now. This is important." His voice came through the speaker cold and distant, nothing like the warmth I'd grown addicted to. "I'm busy, Jaxon. We'll talk tonight." "No, Roy. I need you now. Please." Desperation bled through my words despite my attempts to sound calm. He went silent for several long seconds. Then finally, "Fine. Meet me at the park." 1 hour. I arrived early, sat on our usual bench near the fountain where we'd spent countless afternoons, just existing together. My heart hammered against my ribs, palms sweating despite the cool breeze. This was the moment that would define everything. Our future, our child's future, the rest of our lives. I pictured his face lighting up, imagined him pulling me close and whispering that we'd figure it out together, that nothing could break what we built. But when Roy appeared, walking slowly toward me with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, I didn't see love in his expression. His eyes looked vacant, like he was somewhere else entirely, like I was just an obligation he had to check off his list. "Roy, I'm pregnant," I said softly, forcing myself to meet his gaze, praying I'd see something shift, some spark of the man who promised to never leave. He froze completely, just stood there like someone had pressed pause on his entire existence. "It's yours." "Our baby," I added when he didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even breathe. He took one long shaky breath, closed his eyes like he was in pain. When he opened them again, they were even more distant. "I can't do this, Jaxon." Those 5 words destroyed me. Before I could respond, before I could ask what he meant or beg him to reconsider, he turned around and walked away. Just left me sitting there on that bench, hand pressed protectively over my stomach, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't hold back anymore. I watched him disappear into the crowd of people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that mine had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The fountain kept running behind me, cheerful and oblivious, while I sat frozen in the worst moment of my life. Our child was growing inside me, and the father had just abandoned us both without a second glance. The walk home felt endless. Every step hurt, every breath felt like inhaling glass. I kept my hand on my stomach the entire time, a protective gesture that was already becoming instinct. Whatever happened next, whatever Roy decided, this child was mine. This life depending on me was real. And I'd already failed by choosing someone who could walk away so easily. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I'd missed. Had he always been this capable of cruelty, or had I simply loved him so blindly that I convinced myself we were unbreakable? My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No calls, no texts, no apologies, just emptiness where his presence used to be. I placed both hands over my stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered into the darkness. "But I promise I'll figure it out. I promise I'll protect you even if he won't." The next morning arrived with the same nausea, the same dizziness. But now everything carried a different weight. I wasn't just Jaxon anymore. I was going to be someone's parents. The thought terrified and steadied me in equal measure. Roy made his choice by walking away. Now I had to make mine by staying, by fighting, by becoming strong enough for two. I called the clinic and scheduled my first official prenatal appointment. Made a list of things I'd need. Vitamins, baby books, a plan for how I'd manage work and pregnancy alone. Each item I wrote down felt like building a foundation, something solid to stand on when everything else felt like quicksand. My best friend Liam called that afternoon, his voice bright and unaware. "Hey, wanna grab dinner tonight? Actually, can you come over? I need to tell you something important." "You sound serious. Everything okay?" I looked down at my stomach at the secret I was now carrying alone. "Just come over, please." On my way. When he arrived and I told him everything about the pregnancy, about Roy's reaction, about being abandoned, Liam didn't judge. He just pulled me into a hug and held on while I finally let myself break down completely. For the first time since Roy walked away, I didn't feel entirely alone. Maybe I couldn't count on my child's father, but I could count on this friendship, this support, this lifeline when I needed it most. The first few days after Roy abandoned me, I convinced myself he just needed space to process. Maybe the news shocked him. Maybe he panicked. Maybe once he had time to think clearly he'd realize what he was throwing away. I kept my phone constantly charged, volume turned up, checking it obsessively every few minutes for the message that never came. But as days turned into a week, then two, reality started sinking in with crushing weight. Roy had truly vanished. His apartment building's doorman told me he hadn't seen him in days. His office voicemail stayed full. Every text I sent disappeared into a void, unread and unanswered. He wasn't processing or thinking. He was actively running from me, from our child, from the future we'd planned together. I stopped eating properly. Food tasted like nothing, or worse, made me sick within minutes. The morning sickness combined with heartbreak created a special kind of torture. I'd wake up nauseous, spend half an hour over the toilet, then cry until I had nothing left. The pattern repeated daily, grinding me down until I was just going through motions, existing rather than living. Liam became my anchor during those dark weeks. He showed up at my apartment every evening after work, bringing groceries I couldn't stomach buying myself, sitting with me through the silence when words felt impossible. He never pressured me to talk or move on or be okay. He just existed beside me, solid and dependable in a way Roy never truly was. "You need to eat something, Jaxon," Liam said one evening, unpacking containers of bland food he knew I could keep down. "The baby needs nutrients even when you don't feel like it." "I know," I whispered, forcing myself to take a bite of plain rice. "I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask." He sat across from me, his presence comforting in its steadiness. "Have you heard anything from him?" I shook my head, unable to voice the truth, that I checked my phone hundreds of times daily, that every notification made my heart jump with pathetic hope, that I hated myself for still wanting Roy to come back after everything. "His loss," Liam said firmly. "You're incredible, Jaxon. This baby is lucky to have you." I wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to feel like I was enough on my own. But the bond between Roy and me hadn't broken, still existed somewhere in my chest like a physical ache. Bonded alphas and omegas weren't supposed to separate. The connection ran deeper than choice, deeper than logic. Breaking it would require legal intervention, time, and pain I wasn't ready to face yet. 2 weeks after our park confrontation, I made the mistake of opening social media. I'd been avoiding it, knowing it would hurt, but weakness and loneliness drove me to search for Roy's profile. What I found destroyed the small pieces of my heart that were still intact. A new post, uploaded just hours ago. Roy standing beside a beautiful woman with perfect hair and a radiant smile. Her arm wrapped around his waist possessively. The caption read, "Engaged to my forever." My hands started shaking violently. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattered against the floor. Engaged. He was engaged to someone else. The man who bonded with me, who claimed I was his soulmate, who got me pregnant and abandoned me. That same man was now publicly celebrating his engagement to another person like I never existed. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my stomach with both arms, and screamed. Not crying, screaming. Raw, broken sounds that came from somewhere primal and wounded beyond repair. How could he do this? How could he move on so quickly, so completely, while I was still drowning in the wreckage of what he destroyed? Liam found me on the floor an hour later, still shaking, eyes swollen from crying. He didn't ask questions, just helped me to the couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and held my hand until my breathing evened out. "He's getting married," I finally managed to say, voice wrecked, "to someone named Riley. Like I was nothing. Like our baby is nothing. He's a coward," Liam said, anger sharp in his tone. "He doesn't deserve you or this child. You're better off without him, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. But we're bonded. Legally, permanently bonded. How can he just... because he's selfish and weak. But you're neither of those things, Jaxon. You're the strongest person I know, and you're going to get through this." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to find that strength everyone kept insisting I had. But sitting there wrapped in a blanket, pregnant and abandoned, watching the father of my child celebrate his new life without us, I'd never felt weaker or more alone. That night I dreamed about Roy. Not the man who left me, but the version I fell in love with. The one who traced patterns on my skin and whispered promises in the dark. The one who looked at me like I was his entire world. Dream Roy held me close and apologized, begged forgiveness, swore he'd never leave again. I woke up crying, reaching for someone who wasn't there and never would be again. The empty bed felt enormous, cold despite the blankets. I curled around my barely visible stomach bump and made myself a promise. I'd stop waiting for Roy to come back. Stop checking my phone every 5 minutes. Stop hoping for apologies or explanations. He made his choice by abandoning us. Now I needed to make mine by moving forward, by becoming the parent this child deserved, by building a life that didn't revolve around someone who proved he wasn't worth the pedestal I'd put him on. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another update from Roy's social media, probably more engagement photos. I picked it up, looked at it one last time, then blocked his number and all his accounts. The action felt simultaneously devastating and liberating. "Just you and me now," I whispered to my stomach, feeling the first stirrings of determination replacing the despair. "I'll figure out how to be enough for both of us." The sun started rising outside my window, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. A new day, a fresh start. The beginning of learning how to exist in a world where Roy was gone and I was becoming a parent alone. Terrifying and overwhelming, but mine to face. The following months transformed me in ways I never anticipated. My body changed constantly. The subtle curve of my stomach became undeniable. My scent grew sweeter and stronger, attracting unwanted attention from random alphas on the street. Omega instincts kicked in full force, creating this fierce protective drive over the life growing inside me. Even as my world crumbled externally, something primal inside kept insisting that my baby was safe, healthy, exactly where they needed to be. I started avoiding places that carried memories of Roy. That cafe where we had our first date became off limits. The park where he proposed, then later abandoned me, turned into a location I'd cross the street to avoid seeing. Even certain streets we'd walk down holding hands became emotional landmines. I couldn't navigate without breaking down. Liam never wavered in his support. He accompanied me to every doctor's appointment, asking questions I was too overwhelmed to think of, taking notes about vitamins and dietary restrictions. He bought groceries every week, restocked my fridge with foods I could actually stomach. When panic attacks hit me at 3 in the morning, those terrifying moments when I'd wake up convinced I couldn't do this alone, he'd answer my frantic calls and talk me down until my breathing regulated. "You're so much stronger than you think," he'd tell me repeatedly. "You're surviving something that would break most people. You're fighting for your child every single day. That's strength, Jaxon." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away everything vital and left only the shell behind. Going through motions, checking boxes, existing rather than truly living. Then I discovered Roy had actually gone through with marrying Riley. The ceremony happened at some expensive venue upstate, based on the photos flooding my former mutual friend's social media feeds. Riley looked stunning in her wedding dress. A beta conventionally beautiful, everything society deemed acceptable and appropriate. The pictures showed champagne toasts, elaborate floral arrangements, two families celebrating a union that should never have happened while Roy was still legally bonded to me. I sat in my dim apartment that night, one hand resting on my noticeably pregnant stomach, wondering what I'd done wrong. Was I not enough? Not pretty enough? Not successful enough? Not beta enough to deserve commitment? Would my child someday look at me and wonder why their father chose someone else? Chose to build a family that didn't include us? The baby kicked in. Not the first time that milestone happened weeks ago, but this felt different. Stronger, more insistent, like they were trying to communicate something important. I pressed both palms flat against my stomach, feeling the movement ripple beneath my skin, and something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't about Roy anymore. This wasn't about being abandoned or replaced or deemed insufficient. This was about the tiny human depending entirely on me for survival, protection, love. This child didn't ask to be created in the middle of a relationship destined to implode. They didn't deserve to inherit my pain, my self-doubt, my conviction that we weren't worth fighting for. "I'll fight for you," I whispered into the silence, tears streaming down my face, but feeling different this time, not broken, but determined. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I promise you'll never doubt that you're wanted, loved, enough." The next morning I made several life-changing decisions. First, I stopped checking Roy's social media through fake accounts and mutual friends. Stopped torturing myself with images of his happiness, his new life, his ability to move forward while I remained stuck. If he chose to pretend I didn't exist, fine. I'd return the favor. Second, I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer specializing in omega rights and bond dissolution. If Roy wanted to be married to Riley, wanted to build a life that excluded me and our child, then he could do it without the legal protection of our bond. I'd break it myself, endure whatever physical and emotional agony that process required, because staying connected to someone who abandoned us was worse than the pain of severing that tie. Third, I started preparing for single parenthood seriously. Made budgets, researched daycares, read books about child development, transformed my spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow that felt warm and welcoming. Every item I bought, every decision I made, reinforced this new reality. I was doing this alone, and that had to be okay. Liam helped me assemble the crib one Saturday afternoon, both of us sitting on the floor surrounded by instruction manuals and scattered hardware. "You're really doing this," he said, something like pride in his voice. "Building a whole life. Don't have much choice," I replied, struggling with a particularly stubborn bolt. "Baby's coming whether I'm ready or not." "You're ready. Maybe you don't feel like it, but you are." He handed me the right screwdriver. "And you're not actually alone, you know. I'll be here. Your family will come around eventually. This kid is going to have so many people who love them." His words made my eyes sting with fresh tears, but good ones this time. "Thank you for not abandoning me too." "Never," he said firmly. "You're stuck with me now." I started attending an Omega support group for single parents, sitting in a circle with others who understood the unique challenges of raising children without alpha partners. Hearing their stories, some abandoned like me, others widowed or divorced, made me feel less isolated in my struggle. These were people who'd survived and built beautiful lives despite the circumstances. If they could do it, maybe I could too. My body continued changing, adapting to pregnancy in ways both fascinating and uncomfortable. The baby's movements became more frequent, more vigorous, a constant reminder of the life I was responsible for nurturing. I'd catch myself talking to my stomach while cooking dinner or folding laundry, narrating my day like the baby could actually understand. "We went to the doctor today and you're measuring perfectly," I'd say, hands resting on the curve of my belly. "Your heartbeat was so strong. You're going to be okay. We both are." Roy's absence stopped feeling like an open wound and started feeling more like a scar. Still there, still tender if I pressed on it, but no longer actively bleeding. I stopped expecting him to show up with apologies and explanations. Stopped fantasizing about him realizing his mistake and begging to be part of our lives. He made his choice, married someone else, started building a future that explicitly excluded the child he helped create. And you know what? That was his loss. Not mine. Not ours. My baby deserved better than a father who ran at the first sign of responsibility. Deserved better than growing up watching me pine after someone who proved himself unworthy of either of us. I stood in the completed nursery one evening, taking in the crib, the changing table, the mobile hanging above that played soft lullabies. Everything ready, everything prepared. In a few more months, my child would be here, real and tangible and depending on me completely. I'm scared, I admitted out loud, practicing honesty for when they were old enough to ask hard questions. But I'm also ready. We're going to figure this out together. For the first time since Roy walked away in that park, I believed it. 6 months had passed since Roy walked out of my life, and now my pregnancy was impossible to hide. My stomach curved noticeably under my clothes, announcing to the world what I'd been carrying in secret for so long. Strangers reacted in various ways. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others stared with judgment in their eyes. The few looked simply curious about my situation. But their opinions had stopped mattering weeks ago. I was living for my child now, not for the approval of people who knew nothing about my journey. I found myself in a small cafe downtown, the kind of quiet place where I could lose myself in a book without interruption. My herbal tea sat steaming on the table while I tried to focus on the words in front of me. Tried to exist in this peaceful moment. Then the door chimed and everything changed. Roy walked in. My entire body locked up instantly. My heart stuttered, skipped a beat, then started racing so fast I felt dizzy. Time seemed to slow down as our eyes met across the room. He froze mid-step when he saw me, his gaze dropping immediately to my prominent belly. His eyes went wide with shock, his face draining of color like he'd seen something impossible, something that couldn't be real. He approached slowly, each step measured and careful, moving like I was made of glass that might shatter if he came too close or too fast. Jaxon. His voice cracked on my name, loaded with emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. Why are you here? I asked without looking up, keeping my eyes fixed on my tea like it was the most fascinating thing in the world, refusing to give him the satisfaction of my full attention. I've been searching for you, for weeks now. Now? After everything? My voice came out bitter, sharp edges I didn't bother to soften. After your wedding? After building your perfect little life? What changed? He stood there speechless, looking helpless and lost, like he'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times but forgotten every word the moment he actually faced me. I'm sorry, Jaxon. I was terrified. I made the worst mistake of my life. Please, just let me explain. I set my cup down with deliberate care, then forced myself to meet his eyes directly. Your fear was your problem, not mine. You left me alone when I needed you most. When I was pregnant, scared, confused, drowning. Where were you then? I know that. I understand what I did. But Jaxon, if you'll just listen. There's nothing to hear, I said, keeping my voice steady even though part of me wanted to break down all over again.
You're married to Riley now.
That's your reality. And I'm fine with my baby. I don't need you anymore. He moved closer, reaching toward my shoulder, but I shifted away before he could make contact. Please, Jaxon. Forgive me. I can't survive without you. I'm falling apart every single day. This marriage, it's all fake. None of it is real. I brushed his hand away like it was something contaminated. But I can survive without you, Roy. I am surviving. Look at me, I'm still here. And my baby is healthy. Your absence didn't destroy us. He stayed standing there defeated and broken as I gathered my things and walked out of the cafe. I kept one hand protectively over my stomach, kept my tears locked behind careful control. Because I wasn't the same Jaxon who fell apart when Roy left. I was the Jaxon who fought for my child, who survived, who grew stronger through the pain. The walk home felt different this time. Not the devastating emptiness of 6 months ago, but something closer to resolution. Seeing him again proved what I'd started to believe. I didn't need Roy to be whole. My baby and I were enough on our own. That evening, I sat in the nursery I'd carefully prepared, surrounded by the life I'd built without him. The crib stood ready, the changing table stocked with supplies, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers. All of this existed because I refused to give up, refused to let Roy's abandonment define my future. Your father came back today, I whispered to my belly, hand tracing gentle circles over the curve. But we're okay without him. We've always been okay. The baby kicked in response, a firm push against my palm that made me smile despite everything. This little person knew nothing about betrayal or heartbreak. They only knew my voice, my touch, my constant presence, and maybe that was exactly how it should be. Liam called later that night, checking in like he did every evening. How are you feeling? Roy showed up at the cafe today. Silence stretched between us for several seconds. What did he want? Forgiveness, I think. Redemption. A chance to undo what can't be undone. I shifted on the couch, adjusting a pillow behind my back. I told him no. Good. You deserve better than someone who only comes back when it's convenient for him. I know that now. Took me long enough to believe it, but I finally do. I looked around my small apartment, at all the evidence of the life I'd created. We're going to be fine, Liam. My baby and me. We're actually going to be fine. You're going to be more than fine, Jaxon. You're going to be incredible. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet darkness, processing the encounter with Roy. Part of me had imagined this moment differently, thought I'd fall apart seeing him again, or worse, that I'd want him back despite everything. But the reality was simpler and cleaner than that. I felt nothing but closure, like a chapter of my life had finally definitively ended. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Please don't shut me out. We need to talk. Roy. I stared at the message for a long moment, then blocked the number without responding. Words wouldn't change anything between us. He made his choices, and now I was making mine. The difference was that my choices prioritized the innocent life depending on me. While his had only protected himself, I got ready for bed, following the routine that had become comforting in its predictability. Prenatal vitamins, herbal tea, the pregnancy pillow arranged just right. As I settled under the covers, hand resting on my stomach like always, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Roy could keep searching for forgiveness, keep trying to rewrite history, but I was done looking backward. My future was here, growing inside me, waiting to be born into a life filled with love even if it didn't look like the family I'd once imagined. Tomorrow we have a doctor's appointment, I told my baby, voice soft in the darkness. And next week we're meeting with the daycare. And in 3 months I'll finally get to hold you. Everything's ready. Everything's waiting. Just you and me. The baby shifted, a rolling movement that made my whole stomach ripple. I smiled, closed my eyes and let sleep come without the nightmares that used to plague me. Because I'd faced Roy again and come out stronger, proved to myself that his power over me was gone. Roy didn't give up after that cafe encounter. If anything, seeing me pregnant seemed to ignite something desperate in him. He started appearing everywhere, waiting outside my apartment building in the mornings, standing across from my office during lunch breaks, somehow always in my peripheral vision no matter where I went. His scent, which used to comfort me like coming home, now registered as foreign and unwelcome, like smelling something from a past life that no longer had any connection to who I'd become. Jaxon, please, just talk to me properly, he begged one evening, catching me at my door as I returned from work. His voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before, not even when we first bonded. I unlocked my door but blocked the entrance with my body, creating a physical barrier he couldn't cross. Say what you need to say, then leave. Riley, none of it was real, Jaxon. The marriage was arranged. He rushed out, words tumbling over each other in his hurry to explain. My family forced me into it. They said settling down with a beta was better for my future, for the business. Being with you was too risky in their eyes, threatened my career prospects. I was weak. I gave in to their pressure. But now I realize what a catastrophic mistake. Realize? I laughed, the sound harsh and painful even to my own ears. You're having this realization now? After I've spent 6 months fighting alone? While your child grew inside me and you couldn't be bothered to care? When I cried myself to sleep every night with nobody there? I was scared, Jaxon. The pressure was suffocating. And I wasn't scared? I shouted, losing the tight control I'd maintained. I'm an omega too, Roy. I get scared. I felt that same pressure. But I didn't run. I didn't abandon my responsibilities because they were inconvenient or difficult. He went completely silent, tears gathering in his eyes. But those tears meant nothing to me anymore. They were too late, too insufficient, too much like guilt masquerading as genuine remorse. Leave, Roy. Go back to your wife. Go back to the family you chose over me. You don't belong here anymore. He tried one final time, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I love you, Jaxon. I still do. I always will. No, I said quietly, but firmly. You loved me. Past tense. What you're feeling now is guilt. Not love. There's a difference. I closed the door in his face, then leaned against it heavily, finally allowing myself to cry. But these tears felt different. Cleaner somehow, like washing away the last residue of what we'd been. Because I'd stood up for myself, set boundaries, refused to let him back in just because he'd developed a conscience months too late. That night I sat on the nursery floor, one hand on my belly, talking quietly to my baby like I did most evenings now. You're going to have a good life. I promise you that. Even if it's just us. You're enough for me. But life had one more surprise waiting. The next morning, Liam showed up at my door with his laptop, his expression serious in a way that immediately put me on edge. Jaxon, I discovered something, he said, settling onto my couch. I hope you don't think I was overstepping, but I did some digging into Roy's marriage records. Public information. All legal. What did you find? My stomach knotted with anxiety I couldn't quite name. Roy's marriage to Riley was never legally registered. There were documentation problems, apparently some issue with the paperwork that was never resolved. Which means, he paused, watching my face carefully, legally he's still your bonded alpha, and legally your baby is still his child too. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd spent months building a life separate from Roy, convincing myself that the bond between us was broken beyond repair. But apparently, the legal system didn't care about emotional reality. On paper, we were still connected, still tied together in ways I'd thought were severed. How is that possible? I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to protect my stomach. He got married. There were photos, a ceremony, everything. The ceremony happened, but the legal component never went through. Maybe it was intentional on his part. Maybe it was genuinely an accident. Either way, the bond between you two is still legally valid. I felt sick. Not the pregnancy nausea I'd grown accustomed to, but a deeper sickness born of realizing my freedom was an illusion. Roy could claim parental rights, could force himself back into my life through legal channels, could use the bond we'd formed to override my wishes about how I raised my child. What do I do? I asked Liam, hearing the tremor in my own voice. You fight. You file for bond dissolution and sole custody. You prove that he abandoned you when you needed him most, that he's an unfit parent who only showed interest after 6 months of complete absence. Liam's expression was fierce. Protective. We'll get you the best lawyer money can buy. You're not losing this baby, Jaxon. Not to him, not to anyone. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations and paperwork. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Victoria, who specialized in Omega rights cases, listened to my story with growing outrage on my behalf. You have a strong case for dissolution in full custody, she assured me. His abandonment, the fake marriage, his complete absence during your pregnancy, all of that works in your favor. The bond may still legally, but we can break it. Will it hurt? I asked, thinking about everything I'd read about bond dissolution. The physical pain, the emotional trauma, the way it could affect an Omega's health. Yes, Victoria said honestly, but you're strong enough to survive it. And on the other side, you'll be free. Free. The word tasted like hope and terror mixed together, because breaking the bond meant admitting that everything Roy and I built together was truly over, that the future we'd planned would never exist. But it also meant protecting my child from someone who'd already proven himself unreliable and self-serving. Start the process, I told Victoria, placing both hands protectively over my belly. I want the bond dissolved before my baby is born. I don't want Roy anywhere near the delivery room. She nodded, making notes. We'll move fast. I'll have the initial filing done by tomorrow. Walking out of Victoria's office that afternoon, I felt the weight of the decision I'd made. This wasn't going to be easy or painless. Roy would fight back, would probably show up with excuses and promises and desperate pleas for another chance. But I was done being the person who accepted crumbs of affection from someone who should have offered everything. My baby deserved better. I deserved better. And I was finally strong enough to demand it. The truth about Roy's marriage being legally invalid complicated everything in ways I hadn't anticipated. What I thought was a clean break turned out to be a tangled mess of legal obligations and contested rights. But I refused to let that stop me from moving forward. If anything, it made me more determined to protect the life I'd built. The bond dissolution process began immediately. Victoria filed the necessary paperwork, citing abandonment, emotional neglect, and Roy's complete failure to support me during pregnancy. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, cutting it close to my due date, but Victoria assured me we'd have everything resolved before the baby arrived. Roy received his legal notice within days. The effect was immediate and dramatic. He showed up at my apartment at 7 in the morning, pounding on the door hard enough to wake half my building. "Jaxon, open up. We need to discuss this." His voice carried through the door, frantic and demanding. I wrapped my bathrobe tighter around my pregnant body and approached the door, but didn't open it. "There's nothing to discuss. You'll get the court information through your lawyer." "Don't do this. I can fix everything. Just give me one more chance." He sounded genuinely panicked now, like he'd finally realized the consequences of his actions were becoming permanent. "You don't get another chance, Roy," I said, keeping my voice level and firm. "You destroyed this when you ran. When you chose your family's expectations over me. When you married Riley while I was carrying your child. But the baby, our baby, this is my baby." I interrupted, feeling my protective instincts surge. "You forfeited your parental rights when you abandoned us at the most vulnerable moment. You don't get to claim fatherhood now that it's convenient for you." The pounding stopped. I heard him slide down to sit against my door. Heard the muffled sound of him crying. Part of me, a very small, fading part, felt sorry for him. But sympathy wasn't enough to override the months of pain he'd caused. The nights I'd spent terrified and alone. The moments when I'd questioned whether I could survive single parenthood. "I'm filing for full custody," I continued through the door. "The court will decide if you get any visitation rights. That's not my decision anymore." I walked away from the door, ignoring his continued pleas, and started my morning routine. Prenatal vitamins, breakfast that I could actually keep down, checking my hospital bag for the 100th time. Life continued moving forward, whether Roy accepted it or not. The court proceedings moved faster than expected. Victoria presented a compelling case, documented evidence of Roy's absence, testimonies from Liam and my doctor about my emotional state during the abandonment, even printouts of Roy's social media showing his engagement and wedding to Riley while I was pregnant and alone. Roy's lawyer tried to argue that family pressure had forced him into an impossible situation, that he'd been trying to find a way back to me the entire time. But when Victoria presented evidence that Roy had blocked my number and social media accounts for 3 months, that defense crumbled. The judge, an older alpha woman with kind eyes, looked at Roy with open disappointment. "You bonded with an Omega, got him pregnant, then disappeared completely for 6 months while pursuing marriage to someone else. That's not pressure. That's conscious choice and deliberate abandonment." "Your Honor, I made a mistake," Roy started. "You made several," she cut him off. "And now you're facing the consequences. I'm granting full custody to Jaxon. You'll receive supervised visitation rights, 1 hour per week, if and on if Jaxon agrees to allow it. The bond dissolution is approved and will be finalized within 30 days. Roy looked devastated, but I felt only relief washing over me. It was done. Legally, officially done. My baby would be solely mine, and Roy's presence in our lives would be minimal and controlled. The bond dissolution process itself was as painful as everyone warned. It felt like something vital was being torn out of my chest, leaving a raw wound that throbbed with every heartbeat. My scent changed, became less sweet and more neutral. For 3 days, I ran a fever and could barely keep food down, even worse than early pregnancy nausea. But Liam stayed with me through it all, keeping cold cloths on my forehead, forcing me to sip water and broth, holding my hand when the pain got unbearable. Almost through it, he kept saying, "Just a little longer." And he was right. On the 4th day, I woke up feeling lighter somehow. The bond was gone, severed completely. I was free. 2 weeks later, at 39 weeks pregnant, my water broke at 3 in the morning. Liam drove me to the hospital, stayed through 14 hours of labor, held my hand through every contraction while I squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. And then finally my son was born. He was tiny, perfect, with hazel eyes that looked so much like mine and soft brown hair that would probably darken as he grew. The nurses placed him on my chest, and I burst into tears, joy, relief, overwhelming love, all mixed together into something I'd never experienced before. "You're my whole world," I whispered, kissing his forehead softly. "We're going to be okay. Both of us. I promise you that." Liam stood beside the bed, grinning with tears in his own eyes. "He's beautiful, Jaxon. You did amazing." "We did amazing," I corrected. "I couldn't have survived this without you." Over the next few days in the hospital, I fell completely in love with my son, learned his different cries, figured out how he liked to be held, watched him sleep with an intensity that felt almost supernatural. This was what I'd fought for. This perfect little person who knew nothing about heartbreak or betrayal, who only knew my voice and my touch and my unwavering presence. Roy sent a text through Liam asking to meet the baby. I considered it for a long moment, then replied, "Not yet. Maybe someday when he's old enough to understand. But not now, because right now, this time belonged to just us. Me and my son learning how to be a family, building our life together." Roy could have his supervised visits eventually if I decided to allow them. But these first precious weeks, these were hours alone. Looking at my sleeping baby in my arms, I realized something important. This wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of healing, of growth, of a future that looked nothing like what I'd imagined but was somehow better for being built on truth and strength instead of broken promises. My son and I were going to be fine. Better than fine, we were going to thrive.